Hey everyone, we're back with the Dirt Trail Running Podcast, Coffee with Coaches edition. I'm here with Coach Reese and super excited to be back because we have been off a few weeks just with a busy schedule. But first, I just want to start out and give some shout outs to some of our Ornery Mule coaching coaches. They've had some really great performances in the last week, I would say. Coach Ashley ran, I'm not sure how to say it. Is it Pinetum?
Pintum, yeah.
Yeah, Pineham Mind Games. She
That's the
was,
one, man.
yeah, first overall female in the 12 hour. And Coach Matt also crushed it there. He was overall 24-hour winner, setting a course record of 109 miles. And then Coach Lindsay Phoenix just finished her second Badwater. She didn't just finish, I should say. She crushed it. She was, I think, over 4 hours faster than her last year time. And I think the temperatures were quite a bit higher this year, and there were some storms that happened. And she struggled with some nausea throughout the entire race, but made it through and finished in just over 34 hours. She was sixth overall female, and I believe 16th overall. So some great performances. Excited to share about that. So Reese, what are we going to talk about today?
Okay, we're going to talk about speed reserve today. Okay, so Loretta, this has been obsessing on my mind for the past couple of weeks. Uh, Maybe I shouldn't say obsessing. Maybe I should say I've been meditating on it. Because I think it's erroneous for us endurance athletes to think that we only need to focus on the long, slow distance things, the long, slow, grindy things. A couple weeks ago, I had somebody mentioned to me that a lot of athletes are doing so well because they are out in the terrain, like out at Western States, out training at altitude, just getting on the terrain and getting some gnarly vert in. And that's what makes them so good. And, like I was meditating on that and I was thinking to myself, you know what? There's a lot of athletes that are out in really good places and putting themselves in the terrain that they need to be for their races. But those same athletes are also doing a lot of the speed work to complement and to build their aerobic engine. So I kind of just want to emphasize the point that us endurance athletes, like sure we need to be like training on similar terrain. Of course, that's something that we always talk about in the specific build up to races. Like you definitely want to mimic like where you're going to be at with your races, what type of elevation you're going to be running, things like that. But also, like, we can't ignore these faster parts of our physiology that give us gain towards those longer, slower races. So this
Absolutely.
idea of speed reserve, I got this really cool article from Outside Mag by Alex Hutchinson. So it's going to be good. He's such a great author and puts everything into just layman's context that you can go forth and put all these lessons into your training plan. So the article is called "Even Endurance Athletes Need to Sprint." So yeah, exactly. So Loretta, I see you nodding your head like, of course, yeah, we need to do this. We need to do this. But I just like us coaches know this. We need to be working on the faster stuff. And I just want to like tell everybody why is that? Why do we need to be doing this? So like first and foremost, the idea of speed reserve is just how much extra speed do you have compared to your race pace? So in this article, Alex Hutchison pretty much compares 400, 800 meter runners and just their ability to have like a finishing kick. And this idea of the finishing kick relies heavily on the aerobic system, being able to go through an entire race aerobically so that way you can save some energy at the end for your kick. And he goes through this anecdote about some famous runners back in the 1970s and how one of them was doing really well. And then all of a sudden, there was a bunch of other people that came and like smoked him in a certain race. And his legs just were not able to turn over as quickly as everybody else's, even after a pretty quick start to a 10K. So the moral of that story is to say that like we need to be building these like big aerobic engines, and I think that's something that we've all heard about as ultra runners is like the aerobic engine needs to be high. We need to be able to produce a lot of energy without like feeling the burning and the lactate in our muscles, and be able to do that for a long time. We know that that's the basis of what endurance coaching is. That's fantastic. But then when it comes down to it, compared to how fast your race pace is going to be, how much more can you get your legs turning over? In this case, with the finishing kick, like you have all these athletes running a pretty quick, like 9K, and in the last K to go, they're accelerating a lot quicker. So if you are racing your 10K and you are at your 10K like speed, your utmost speed, and you don't have any extra speed or turnover in the legs, you're going to get left in the dust compared to all those other athletes that have been training their legs to turn over quicker. So in this case, for ultra runners, let's take like 50K runners into context. So your 50K pace might be 10 minutes per mile on like a relatively like rolling trail. So you do all of your training at 10 minutes per mile, and you can hold that really well. It's no worry for you. You can do it without thinking. Your body just naturally clicks over into that gear. But you never take the time to get your legs turning over faster at like 9 or maybe 8 minute paces. Maybe your all out mile is like a 9 minute pace. So you're running this 50K at your 10 minute pace. The fastest you can possibly move is your legs is at a 9 minute pace. There's really not too much distance there between your race pace and how much faster your legs can go. I like to call that gear work. So like we can't expect to run like a race so close to our maximum ability to turn our legs over, right? Like we kind of know that like, hey, like if you're going to be running a 50K race and like you want to do it at 10 minutes per mile, but the fastest you can move is 10 minutes per mile. That's kind of, arbitrary, or it's not going to work out too well for you, because you're basically, how do you expect to move your legs as fast as you can for 32 miles if that's as fast as they can possibly go? I don't know if that's making sense, or if I should elaborate a little bit more, Loretta, if that made sense to you.
No, I
Um,
get it. Yep.
but that's the idea of speed reserve, is the difference between our race pace and how fast we can possibly go. So Alex Hutchinson goes through that anecdote in this article, and he comes out with this idea. He comes out with this notion that basically says um, speed reserve concept is useful in that it highlights the importance of maximum speed, which most endurance athletes neglect entirely. Improving your speed reserve by explicitly working on your maximum speed can have some direct benefits. Like if your flat out speed simply isn't fast enough to match the paces that your competitors will hit during a race. So that comes down to the idea that like, hey, if you're going as close to your maximum pace, it's going to be pretty unsustainable in the long run. And then he also says, the idea of speed reserve can also have indirect benefits. While maximum aerobic speed is a reflection of your cardiovascular fitness, maximum sprint speed is a function of how you apply force to the ground. You develop it with workouts like all-out short sprints, plyometrics, heavy resistance training. These are all things that we talk about in this podcast. And that this idea of speed reserve isn't just about better sprinting, it's about improving how you apply forces to the ground better. So these are all things that we talk about regularly. Like, hey, if we work on that top end ceiling, it's going to make all of your easy runs feel easier. It's going to make your running economy better. And running economy is going to be such an important factor for getting you in your ultra endurance races. Because if you're not moving efficiently or economically, then you're wasting a lot of time on the table with wasted movement that could be getting you pointed down the trail. So long story short, this article basically just describes like, hey, if you work on that maximum sprint, if you work on your ability to turn your legs over, all of these other paces below it are gonna feel way easier, but you're gonna broaden this range with which you have between your race pace and then your top end speed. And I think a great demonstration of this principle actually happened at Western States earlier this year. So, you had Rod Farvard and Hayden Hawks finishing basically, I think it was like less than a minute between each
Yeah.
other, or like it was something
It was
ridiculous
super close. Yeah.
after a 100-mile race, right? So they basically both sprinted into the finish. So, I mean, when you're so close in a 100-mile race, your overall average pace is going to look fairly similar. You know what I mean? Like after 100 miles, the difference between 15 to 60 seconds is going to be negligible in your overall average pace. But then the ability for those runners to pick up their higher gears after the end of such a long and arduous and aerobically demanding event really came into play. And I think that's the direction that a lot of our sport is going towards, is like, hey, like we have these competitors that are now bunching up towards the end of the line because everybody is getting all those marginal gains and learning how to run these races at their maximum performance. So the idea of, hey, these athletes are only getting out of train and only training like incredibly specifically, that's it, kind of like it ignores all of the potential benefits that you can get from training your speeds, such as like on a track or on a flat road, to get your legs turning over quicker. So it's what I call gear work. Like we got to have those lower gears where we can just chug all day. But we also got to be able to click into those faster gears. So that way, when the time comes and we need to move our legs a little bit faster, we can. Not only because if your competitors are right on your heels, then you're going to have a serious advantage if your race pace and your maximum velocity have a good gap in between them, because then you'll be able to accelerate really quick at the end of an aerobic event. But it'll also make those race paces feel a heck of a lot easier. So that's this idea of speed reserve. What is your goal pace for whatever race that you're running? But how fast can you just move your legs overall? Which, the idea of sprinting and getting your sprint mechanics is something that might, like terrorize our hamstrings when we think about them. Like, when is the last time a lot of us have sprinted or tried a faster effort? But I think that building that into one's routine is going to not only ensure that like you're building this economy, you're building this ability to run your races and be tactful, whether it's with your own physiology or against other competitors or against the course itself. But it's just going to make you a more efficient runner in the process. So I think it's a huge concept that a lot of people have been ignoring. And Loretta, I want to ask you, like, what does this resonate with you? Like, how do you take your athletes through this idea? We talk about this all the time offline, but how do you try to teach and tell your athletes that, hey, we got to be working on those faster paces?
Right. So I love this because I completely agree with, blending in speed work. And of course, we know that I love strength work, and which also kind of facilitates that. But I think the big thing too is it's not just for those top competitors. You mentioned a lot about, having a kick at the end and beating a competitor. It applies to all athletes, right? From the back of the pack to the front of the pack, right?
Mhm.
Because if we can raise the ceiling, I kind of think of it as they're all kind of building blocks on each other, right? So if we can get our base in and then start raising the ceiling with some of that faster work, starting out with strides, because you mentioned like, hamstring issues, things that could happen, right? We want to make sure we're strong, right? By doing some strength so that we aren't going to get into an issue with injury by pushing ourselves too fast when our body is not ready for that, right? So our muscles aren't strong enough to go at that speed. So we want to be thinking about that. We want to be thinking about mobility and, starting out with easier things like strides. So we can start working on our mechanics, working on our leg turnover, and then build ourselves into some of that faster work, which is going to raise the ceiling, right? So when we're talking about speed reserve, we're talking about above VO2 max, like pushing ourselves, right? So we're like, and a lot of people have a hard time getting in out of that comfortable because we're used to running at an easy conversational pace all the time. But there's times when we want to push above that, right? I'm saying that conversational pace, we want at least 80% of the time still, but we still have some time that we want to work above that. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of the where I kind of start people with. It's like, let's look at where they are. Like, are we still in a base phase, or are we past that? Are we ready to start moving forward? What kind of strength training are they doing? What kind of mobility are they doing? So we can make sure we're safely taking them to be able to kind of push up to that higher paces.
Yeah, totally. And I like that you highlighted too that it affects everybody. Like, I like to talk about competitors, I like to talk about everybody, but like the long story short is everybody needs to be doing this because it will just make your skeletal muscular and your tendinous system more adaptable and give it more range of paces that you have access to, so you can play with those at different points in the race, right? Like, if we look at like a really hilly race, well, there's not going to be hills all the time. Like if you're out running in the Kettle Moraine, you're going to hit hills for sure, but you're also going to have these flat sections. And if you don't have any range of like, hey, what is my what is my average race pace, but then how fast can I get my legs going, then you can't be as tactical of like, okay, I'm going to sit back on the hills so that way I can pick it up a little bit on the flats, because you're not going to have access to that faster leg turnover. So I think like the idea is very analogous to the aerobic system, right? Like we always talk about the aerobic system and like build a big base and then like layer on some like higher efforts. That way you can raise the ceiling and you can raise the floor and make your easier efforts feel easier, you know,
Right.
if you raise the ceiling. But really, this idea of speed reserve also plays on the skeletal muscular system, because if you can raise the ability for your legs to turn over and raise um, the demand or the power output that they can produce, then all of those other paces on your skeletal muscular system are going to feel really easy. I think we kind of feel this, and like I've experienced this in races too, where it's like, man, some races are so long. It's like, you know, I haven't been going that fast for that long. Like I feel like my breathing is okay, my heart rate is okay, but there comes this point in a race where it's like I just can't move my legs any faster. And a lot of the times when I think back on my training, it's like, oh, because for the past like 4 to 6 weeks, I really haven't moved my legs faster. My muscles are no longer in touch, or they don't remember what it feels like to have like that extra speed influence.
Right.
Um, so yeah, no matter where you're at, it's just incredibly important. And I do like that you said before too, like we got to assess people, like where are you at currently? Because if somebody hasn't been putting in like 3 to 4 weeks of consistent running, some mobility things, some strength things, then like, yeah, we don't need to go like testing your body with some uh, uh, higher velocity influence or stress on the body. But I think that like, you know, for like me and a lot of my athletes, like when we're in a base season, or like sometimes I call it like tissue prep, you know, where it's like we're just preparing the body for something that's a little bit more intensive with training. Um, it's more about getting in those runs, feeling good, feeling fluid, maybe doing some slight progressions, kind of going up to marathon pace and then back, and then up to marathon pace and back, because marathon pace isn't all that. It is stressful on it because everything's a stress on the body, but it's not as demanding as doing something like a sprint, right? Um, so, and you know, by doing that, we're just kind of getting the body used to like transitioning between different paces. What I'll then do is I'll have people do some hill strides, mainly because hill strides are less impactful on the body because you're going uphill, so there's not as much like gravitational impact. So you can get a high power output, a high like drive, without putting as much stress on the skeletal muscular system. And for anybody that's new to the podcast, for anybody that's new to the stride terminology, the way that I define it is a 30-second effort where for 10 seconds, you're ramping up to like a 5K to 2K type of effort or velocity. You're holding that for the middle 10 seconds. Then for 10 seconds, you're ramping back down. And I emphasize the ramp back down because a lot of people will just kind of stop. And we don't want to do that. We want to take our body out of our gears, to use the terminology before. But then after that, you know, like then we're transitioning that to flat speed. And the nice thing about a stride is that like if you really take that ramp in and out of the stride, then we're going to be cycling your body through the gears up to a higher gear and then back down, or up to a higher intensity and then back down. For example, you know, I was working with some people over this weekend where we were ramping. We were starting at like a 10-minute pace, and then over 10 seconds, we would run up to a 6-minute pace, hold that 6-minute pace for 10 seconds, and then ramp back down. Um, and it, to emphasize the ramp back down, to bring you back down through and control your body as it's decelerating, which is pretty important for injury reduction. But doing that, you know, just teaches the body how to click over faster. So I think it's important when we talk about speed reserve, like for everybody out there that you know, hasn't done an interval in a really long time, or hasn't been to the track in a long time, or the idea of 100s or 200s or 400 sounds scary. You know, I remember, you know, like when I was building up from injury a couple years ago with my knees, like the idea of doing an interval section, I was like, oh my God, I don't know what paces to run. I don't know what effort is going to be. I don't know what it's going to feel like. But doing these strides is a really great way to prepare the tissues for something a little bit more demanding down the road. And when you ramp in and out of it, it should feel nice and smooth going in and out. So you're not like starting at a standstill and then sprinting really fast, which can
Right.
sometimes knacker people's hamstrings. Um,
Sometimes I think starting out with hill strides is a good way too for people who might think they will overdo it if we just give them flat strides. right?
Hmm.
Because it's gonna slow you down a little bit as you're going into the hill, and so you're not gonna go and injure yourself, right? If you're one of those people that are gonna be like, okay, I'm doing a stride and think you're sprinting all out, because that's not exactly what a stride is, right? So I think that that helps. I also want to say, I think you've been sitting around with Dr. Liesel talking about tissue adaptation, and I feel like I hear her right now when you're talking about it.
Oh my gosh, we're on the same page. I don't think I've talked with her in a
It's
couple
about the
weeks.
tissue.
How's she doing?
She's doing great.
Good.
So yeah, and I think that it's really important, like when I'm thinking about speed too, that's what I was going to say actually, is that sometimes endurance athletes don't really want to hang out at the track, right? Some people that are, doing ultras, like the track is not their thing. So I like to build so you can still build in speed work on the trail, on a flatter path, by time, and kind of correlating it to what maybe a 200 or a 400 time would be, and you can still build those in, right, without feeling the pressure of 200 meters or 400 meters. Or some people are like, what is 200 or 400 meters, if they haven't spent time on the track. So there's ways to adapt it to what you like to do and not force yourself to be on the track. Now, I think the track is also really a nice way if you don't mind being on the track, because it's easier to mentally break it down where you're at within that 100 or 200 or 400 distance, I think. And then it's also a little bit easier to stick with consistency, right? Because even if we're doing it on like a flat path, like let's say Hennepin, there's still some variances. So your route might not be completely as consistent as being on a track.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so that's like the tissue preparation phase, right? Like I don't consider the stride to be like this top end speed developer
Right,
because
right,
because again, we're building up to like a 5K effort, and a 5K for a lot of people is something you can hold between 20 to 40 minutes. So by definition, or 20 minutes to an hour, by definition, that's not going to be like as fast as you can possibly move, you know?
right,
Like you
right,
can't move as fast as you can possibly move, for 100 meters and stretch that all the way out to 20 minutes. It's impossible. So this is the tissue prep phase, right? Like doing the hill strides, doing the flat strides will prepare your body to then not be so like awestruck when you decide to do like a flat stride. And Loretta, I love that you mentioned that like it's totally cool to do these on trail. I think that's great. I am going to push back a little bit and say that like yes, do them on trail, but if we are going to be focusing on speed,
mhm,
and that like that tissue prep of getting plyometric pop in the tendons and in the muscles, and just being able to reduce that ground contact time and really pop off the ground, influence how we're putting forces into the ground, then let's do a little bit of work on the road. Let's do a little bit of work on the track if you can. There's a lot of people that don't like going to the track. That's fine. Then do a handful of them on the road. 3 to 5
right,
is all you need. The reason being is because trails, typically they're dirt. You don't get as much of that pop or that plyometric rebound off of the ground when your foot has to kind of squish into the earth a little bit, and then as you push off, it squishes a little bit more. It's the same reason why nobody's going to be setting any 5K PRs on a sand course compared to a road course, because you don't have that plyometric pop, right? So
I guess
it's totally cool.
yeah, I guess I should correct myself. When I think about trail, I have a rail trail beside me that is paved. It is
Mhm.
paved, and it's also crushed limestone. So when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about the paved section, but of a
Yeah.
trail.
Well, and that highlights the difference between like just ultra running in general. We have these races that are going to be in the woods and are like, Midwest states, like when it's super muddy, and you're not going to have a lot of like plyometric pop off the ground. But then there's a lot of trail races like Hennepin's coming up where it's like, it's basically a glorified road, so it's a trail race 100%, but the way that it impacts your body is a lot like how the road does because the surface is so much
Yes.
harder.
Yep.
So if somebody's out there preparing for Hennepin, like this would be a great opportunity to get some speed into the legs, so that way your Hennepin pace feels all that much more easy. But then once we move on to that tissue prep, so I guess just to recap, we have like 4 to 6 weeks of just base building, feeling good, maybe incorporating a few strides, mobility, a little bit of strength. We're feeling good, no injuries, awesome. Then we go into like about 3 weeks of incorporating some strides, a couple hill strides, a couple flat strides. You can do those on road or trail. Definitely try to get a couple on the road or on the track. But then we can move into like, okay, let's move the body really quick. So all in all, that's about like going from nothing to going to running as fast as you can. it's about 7 to 8 weeks. So, for somebody that's out there that hasn't moved their body that quickly in a long time, maybe it doesn't have to be 7 to 8 weeks if you've already been putting in a lot of that base training. Maybe you can cut out the first 4 weeks. But for everybody out there that, took some time off, was in a transition season, is building up for their races in the fall, that's kind of the time that we need to prepare our body to move really fast. But once we get out of there, then all it really takes is 50 to 100 meters. Any longer than that, and we're not really focusing on true speed. 200 meters maybe tops, I would say. But more importantly than if it's a 50 meter, 100 meter, or a 200 meter, is the rest interval. Loretta, what do you think about rest intervals for working on maximum speed? What do we want to look for?
Right. So working on maximum speed, you're going to want to have more rest. So you're like at full recovery to repeat it again. So, a lot of times we're thinking about intervals and maybe it's going to be the exact amount. Like let's say we're running a minute and we're going to do it rest a minute. Well, in these type of intervals, you're going to want to rest maybe 3 times the amount, right? So that you're completely back to base and ready to go again. It's giving you a chance to restore and go again.
100%. I love it. As trail runners and just as a coach, I feel like I see a lot of people, they want to get that aerobic stimulus out of their workouts, meaning they want to feel the breath be heavy. They want to feel like, that they've either gone a really long ways without stopping, or that they're feeling some sort of burning in the legs, or that they're putting out a really good effort. And that's all like, yeah, it taxes your muscles, but it mainly taxes your cardiovascular system, just the ability to go a long time, aerobically. But with these sessions, the intensity isn't on keeping your breath going all the time or keeping a consistent pace all the time. The intention is that we want to target the skeletal muscular system. So when we go and we do a 50-meter sprint or a 100-meter sprint or 200 meters hard on the track, like your heart rate's going to come up, it's going to be really high, but we want that power output to be really high from your legs because we're training that maximum ability to move as quickly as you can. So therefore, your rests are probably not going to be jogging. They're probably going to be resting, because if you're jogging through that rest, your heart rate is still going to be very elevated, and that doesn't give your body enough time to flush out any metabolic byproducts or rejuvenate any of the energy stores that are going to help you in the next sprint. Loretta, before we got online, we were talking about the creatine phosphate system or the phosphagen system. So that is the first form of energy that your body will, or the first way that your body will produce energy when you start a really high intensity exercise. And those stores of energy get depleted very quickly, within about like 9 seconds or so of your really hard interval. And then your anaerobic system can kick in. Well, we all know that the anaerobic system can produce lactate, hydrogen ion, that stuff accumulates. It doesn't accumulate a ton in a 100-meter sprint because by the time you reach 100 meters, it's already over, but your body still accumulates some of that byproduct. So we want to give the body enough time to aerobically be able to flush and process a lot of that hydrogen ion, a lot of that lactate, replenish some of the creatine phosphate stores. So that way, by the time you start the next rep, the intention is there and you can move your legs really fast and really hard again. These aren't the types of workouts where like we want to see a little bit of decline in velocity, right? Because if we're declining a little bit of velocity, say if we're doing like 500-meter sprints or 600-meter sprints, that means that you didn't give your body enough rest in order to then go and move it to the velocities that it needs to get the skeletal muscular system to adapt. So these sessions are all about getting the legs working as fast as they can, not about making the lungs burn as hard as they can. So you want to hit that 100 meters. You want to feel like you're powering through it. You don't want to feel super fatigued. And then you want to shut it down. Maybe do a walking rest for, if it takes you, if it takes you 45 seconds to go 100 meters, or if it takes you 45 seconds to go 50 meters, then maybe, like you said, you want to take a 3-to-1 rest to recovery ratio. So maybe that means that your recovery is 2.5 minutes first of just walking, and then maybe like a little bit of jogging around to get ready for the next interval. What I really like is, like dynamic recovery. So I'll do some leg swings while I'm recovering. I'll do some like toe touches in front of me. Knee drives, knee marches, just get the legs moving and then prepare for the next one. And you really don't want to see a decline in any of your paces. These efforts too, the intention is I'm going to be running fast. but I don't want to be running ugly. So remember, think like keep the torso tall, like slight forward lean, drive with the knees and the hips, nice long
Smile, smile.
strides. Yeah, smile, listen to some good music, whatever it is. Um, but these sessions aren't like they're not drive you into the ground sessions for trail and ultra runners. Like you shouldn't leave these sessions feeling like, man, I am slugged, like I need to go home and have like 2 hours worth of rest and like a bunch of carbs and a nap and all of this. It should be one of those things that kind of rejuvenates you and makes you go, okay, cool, like it's fun to get my legs moving fast.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, we would be remiss if we didn't mention like a thing that would really help support your top end speed is strength training, right? Back squats, deadlifts, and plyometrics, box jumps, all of those things are going to be helpful in supporting your development and your speed.
Exactly. Yeah, and the reason why is because we want to focus on not touching the ground as much as possible when we do these efforts. We want to hit the ground and pop off. Like that's how you get that leg turnover really fast. So like plyometrics also in the gym focus on hitting the ground, popping right back up. Box jumps focus on leaving the ground as quickly as you can. And the strength training is just there to complement and make sure that the muscles are strong enough and resilient enough to handle that high velocity contraction and relaxation that you're going to be doing with some of that sprint work.
Right. So you got
Um,
power and explosiveness, right? Paired
yep,
together and equals speed.
yep, exactly. And like the way that I would incorporate these in somebody's overall season is like we're going to be building up to them, and we may take like 3 weeks or so where we're just doing some of that faster sprint work, and then all other miles are really easy. So kind of like a more polarized approach. Where we're either moving really slow and really easy or really fast.
Right.
But then throughout the course of the year, say if somebody's building up and we're getting more specific in somebody's race, maybe we have a less reliance on those really fast days, but I'll still try to plug them in like every 1 to 2 weeks or so, just to make sure that like, hey, we're still popping off the ground. Or maybe I tell people like, hey, you're going to be doing 3 strides. They're going to be a 30-second effort, but I want you to build for 5 seconds. I want you to sustain for 15 seconds. And then I want you to ramp down. And instead of going like 3 to 5K effort, you're going to build up to that 100-meter velocity that you've been practicing on the track or on the roads or on the trail. Um, so, and the nice thing is about those is that you can kind of interject them like wherever you would like, because they're not so demanding and put so much stress on the muscles that like in 2 or 3 days you can't come back for your specific like long run with some tempo intervals to get you prepared for Hennepin. So if these sessions do leave somebody feeling really slugged, then you got to look at how many of them are you doing, what is the rest actually looking like for the athlete, and then what does the rest of their training program look like. Maybe they just need more rest, they need more sleep, maybe there's a lot of things going on in life. So yeah, if your athlete is, or if you are being slugged by 5 rounds of a 100-meter sprint, after doing all of that base and all that tissue prep and the strength and mobility work, then we need to look at what is your intention of those. Are you getting the recovery in between the repetitions that you need? Can you come back, or maybe do you need a rest week? Maybe it's just been a long couple weeks of training and you need a rest week. But long story short is that we need to be training and keeping and reminding that body every once in a while, like, hey, what does it feel like to actually go faster? So that way when you're in a race and like you're running and maybe like somebody is behind you and you're like, shoot, okay, there's like a quarter mile to the finish and they're gaining on me. No matter where you're at in the field, I hear stories all the time of people being like, I just want to beat the guy behind me. Maybe that's your chance where you can say, you know what, I've done a lot of 100-meter sprints. I'm gonna get close to the track. I'm gonna get close to the finish. I'm just gonna let my legs turn over fast and let it fly. Because if you can click into that gear when the guy behind you or the person ahead of you can't, then you're going to be accelerating through the finish line. And that is the best feeling in the world, no matter where you're at.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I also think, thinking about this early in the season when you're, just starting to build to a race, our volume is probably going to be a little bit lower too. because the intensity is a little bit higher. I think sometimes we get into the mindset that we're doing ultra running, so we have to run lots and lots of miles all the time. But, during this point in time, it's really nice to be able to lower that volume down, increase the intensity so that you're being able to actually put the full effort into that workout without having so much volume that you can't balance both.
Yeah, 100%. And we see this all the time of people thinking just like more is better, more, more, more. In order to run 100 miles, I have to run 100 miles in training. And that's not always the case, you know.
Right,
So the aerobic system can be developed many ways, and volume is just one small factor, an important one, but a small factor. You have volume, you have intensity, you have your rests, you have what type of terrain you're on, you have sleep, all those other variables that influence how your body adapts to certain workouts. And thus, to be ready for a race, you have the taper going into the race. You have just a multitude of variables that you can play with as an endurance athlete that doesn't just revolve around what is Strava telling me I'm doing every week and what do people see my mileage look like. So yeah, and then there's cross training on top of that too to build the aerobic system.
right, definitely.
Um, so that's hugely important, and that's not to say that like getting on the terrain that you're going to be running on isn't important, right? But like
Oh,
the
definitely.
overall theme of today's conversation is that like you know, this is a really important way that we can better ourselves and develop that aerobic machinery so that way we can take it to the type of terrain that we're going to be racing on and know that we can get the most out of ourselves, regardless of what terrain that we're on.
Right,
I guess the way that I would analogize this is like, sure, you can put your Honda Civic on a Formula One course, but like you're not going to get as much out of that Honda Civic as if you spend the time in the garage, um, you know, uh, increasing the engine and making the chassis more robust and whatnot via your intervals and via your strides and via some of that faster work that we're doing. So that way you can take that Honda Civic, tune it up as much as you can, and then put it on the race course and know that like, okay, I'm going to be able to do this course justice as opposed to just being on the course full time.
right. Nice.
So yeah, that was the conversation that I wanted to bring up today. So for anybody out there that's going to be running Midwest states, good luck. We have just about like a month left. What's after that? Um, we have Hennepin. We have the new race that Michelle acquired, the
Oh,
Des Plaines
yes.
River Trail
Yes.
race.
Yeah.
We have Soul Crusher. For anybody that's going to be doing Soul Crusher, Des Plaines River Trail, anything in October, like now is a great time to start to build up and get back in touch with what does speed mean. And I have a feeling that a lot of listeners that are tuning into this podcast have probably done a lot of their base training already because us runners love to be running. So you're already ahead of the game if you've been consistent for the past month or so. And well on your way to moving your legs faster and using all that aerobic fitness that you've developed to move your body quicker down the trail.
Right. But if you need support with that, we have lots of coaches that are here to help you. So you can reach out and we would love to talk with you.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much, Loretta. It was fun catching up with you. It's been 2 weeks. It'll probably be another 2 weeks until I get on the podcast again. So we're going to take a little hiatus next week, but then after that, we'll be back.
Okay. All
So,
right. Take care.
all right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.